Everyone believed my husband saved his company with brilliance and courage. The headlines said so. The investors repeated it. Even our friends whispered his name with admiration, as if survival itself had crowned him a genius. I stood beside him through it all, dressed in silk and restraint, applauding at the right moments. To them, I was the elegant constant, the loyal wife who smiled while her husband fought storms only powerful men could survive. What they never questioned was why my name kept appearing in his speeches. When the company began to fall, he spoke of trust. When creditors circled, he spoke of legacy. And when investors hesitated, he spoke of me. My reputation. My background. My unshakable belief in his vision. They believed him. Our marriage, from the outside, looked curated for envy. Private jets. Charity galas. Champagne poured into crystal glasses while strings played softly in the background. But wealth has a way of disguising rot. The higher you rise, the quieter the cracks become. At home, he was distant. Calculating. Always working, always distracted. He kissed my cheek like punctuation, necessary, meaningless. Conversations became brief updates, never confessions. I noticed how carefully he avoided details. How often he changed subjects when numbers came up. Still, I trusted him. Trust is dangerous when it's earned slowly and taken quickly. The night he announced the company's recovery, cameras flashing and applause filling the room, he reached for my hand and held it high. "I couldn't have done this without her," he said, smiling. The room erupted. What they didn't see was the way his grip tightened, not with affection, but control. Not gratitude, but possession. That was the moment my name stopped being mine. The papers arrived 2 weeks later, sealed in a black folder he placed gently on the dining table, like a gift. He didn't sit down. He didn't explain. He simply said, "We need your signature." I laughed at first. Not because it was funny, but because disbelief often disguises itself as humor. "For what?" I asked, already knowing the answer would be incomplete. "Just formalities," he replied. His tone was calm, rehearsed. "Investors need reassurance. Temporary authority transfers. Standard procedure." I flipped through the pages. Legal language dense enough to suffocate meaning. Paragraphs folded inside paragraphs. My name appeared everywhere, next to words like liability, guarantor, collateral. "Why is my name here?" I asked. He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice as if intimacy would soften deception. "Because they trust you. Because you're untouchable. Because this only works if you stand with me." Stand with me. Marriage teaches you that phrase can mean love or leverage. That night, it was leverage. I told him I needed time. He smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Of course," he said. "Take all the time you need." The next morning, my credit card declined. By noon, my assistant informed me that several accounts had been frozen pending verification. By evening, I received a polite email from the bank requesting a meeting, urgent. Pressure doesn't always arrive screaming. Sometimes it comes dressed as inconvenience. At dinner, he spoke casually about the consequences of delay. Lawsuits. Liquidation. People losing jobs because of hesitation. He never raised his voice. He didn't need to. He was planting guilt carefully, like seeds that would grow overnight. "You wouldn't want to be responsible for that," he said softly. I realized then how small my world had quietly become. How dependent. How curated. Every safety net I thought I had was tied, invisibly, to him. When I signed the papers 3 days later, he kissed my forehead and whispered, "You saved us." But as the ink dried, something colder settled in my chest. I hadn't saved anything. I had surrendered it. The gala was held at the Argenhal Hotel, a cathedral of glass and gold overlooking the river. Crystal chandeliers hovered like frozen fireworks above a sea of silk gowns and tailored power. This was his kingdom. His arena. I stood beside him in a crimson dress chosen by his stylist, smiling on command, silent by design. Applause rippled through the room as he stepped onto the stage. The CEO. The visionary. The man who built an empire from nothing. I knew better. Empires rarely rise alone. He thanked investors, mentors, and friends. Then he paused. Looked directly at me. "And of course," he said, smiling, "none of this would be possible without my wife. The woman who keeps everything stable." Laughter followed. Polite. Confident. Then he added, "She prefers not to ask questions. That kind of trust is rare these days." The laughter sharpened. My smile didn't move. In that moment, I understood the performance. The papers. The silence. I wasn't his partner. I was his insurance policy. Faces turned toward me. Curious. Amused. Measuring. Heat crept up my neck, but I didn't look away. I raised my glass slowly, acknowledging the room like a queen accepting a crown she never asked for. Inside, something fractured. Public humiliation isn't loud. It's precise. Surgical. It leaves no visible wound, only a scar that burns long after applause fades. That night, as cameras flashed and champagne flowed, I made a decision no one noticed. If he wanted a silent woman, I would become invisible. And invisible women see everything. After the gala, I withdrew into a small, sunlit study on the top floor of our apartment. Papers, charts, and financial reports littered the oak desk. Outside, the city glittered, unaware of the storm I was quietly assembling. I traced every transaction he had made in the past 5 years, looking for patterns. Flaws. Vulnerabilities. Mistakes hidden by charm and arrogance. The more I learned, the more the empire appeared like a house of cards, stunning from the outside, fragile within. I contacted old colleagues he had ignored, people I had once known as a young professional before I became a wife in the public eye. They were cautious at first, then cooperative when they realized I was neither angry nor impulsive. I wasn't seeking revenge yet. I was gathering intelligence. Nights passed in calculation. Algorithms. Forecasts. Market simulations. I learned to anticipate every move he could make. Every investor he could call. Every bank that could be convinced. By the time I spoke to anyone, I knew exactly how they would respond. I didn't discuss this with friends. I didn't whisper it to anyone. My plan required patience, invisibility, and control. One evening, while he relaxed in his study, I overheard him on the phone, bragging about future acquisitions, calling himself untouchable. He laughed like a man who believes himself immortal. That laugh, it was the spark that reminded me why I had started. Revenge is often misunderstood. It is not about spectacle, noise, or humiliation. It is about restoring balance and reclaiming what was quietly taken. Every meeting, every phone call, every signature he needed would soon pass through my hands, and I would choose which to let live, which to destroy. By the end of the week, I had a plan. Not impulsive. Not reckless. A strategy so precise that it could only succeed if executed with absolute patience. I poured myself a glass of red wine and smiled. The first move was ready. The first move was subtle. A small adjustment in one of the company's subsidiary accounts. Nothing illegal, nothing traceable. Yet when combined with minor delays I had orchestrated, it created a ripple that investors could not ignore. Within days, whispers started. Something is off, they said. Numbers aren't lining up. The CEO reassured them publicly, but the seed had been planted. Uncertainty is far more dangerous than outright panic. I attended meetings as usual, polite and composed. My eyes watched more than my lips spoke. I noticed the smallest details, which investors questioned aggressively, which advisors hedged their statements, who was waiting for permission to speak. Knowledge became my silent weapon. At home, he remained oblivious. Or perhaps he underestimated me. Confidence can be blinding. He assumed I was loyal, compliant, absorbed in domestic trivialities. Every evening, he recounted his victories, unaware that the foundation beneath his empire was quietly shifting. By the end of the second week, banks began asking pointed questions. Legal teams requested documentation he hadn't prepared. Partners grew uneasy. My patience was paying dividends. He noticed the tension but misread it. He attributed the changes to market volatility, rumors, even my supposed absence of influence. He didn't see the pattern. He didn't see me. And I smiled every time I heard him claim everything is under control. Week 3 brought more subtle shifts. Stock options misaligned. Payment schedules delayed. Small contracts postponed. Nothing that would trigger alarms immediately, but enough to stir unease in the boardroom. I watched him closely. Confidence still radiated from his posture, but cracks appeared in fleeting glances. He fidgeted with cufflinks, tapped pens, and adjusted his tie more often. He was aware something was off but couldn't pinpoint it. At night, I compiled reports of every minor discrepancy. Charts, tables, and graphs filled the study walls, each figure carefully annotated, showing how one small domino could topple the larger structure. I never underestimated the power of patience. Friends began calling, subtly probing, asking questions that seemed casual but were laced with curiosity. "Have you noticed anything unusual at the office?" they asked. I smiled politely. "Nothing worth worrying about," I said. The truth was concealed beneath the calm surface. I studied his habits, too. His predictable meetings, his favorite restaurants, his moods before investor calls. I began sending coded messages to financial analysts I trusted. Little nudges in stock performance, strategic leaks of information, all designed to redirect attention subtly, without trace. By the end of the third week, the first significant investor expressed concern. I had no direct contact with him, yet every move felt guided, every reaction anticipated. The empire he believed solid was now a carefully orchestrated network of vulnerabilities, quiet, invisible, and inescapable. I poured another glass of wine and allowed myself a rare, private smile. Each step brought me closer to the inevitable conclusion. Control was no longer theoretical, it was imminent. The day of the reveal arrived quietly. Investors were summoned under the pretense of routine updates. The room smelled of polished wood and subtle anxiety. He entered confidently, unaware of the intricate web laid quietly beneath his empire. As presentations began, I handed out packets of reports I had meticulously prepared. Charts showed inconsistencies, contracts revealed overlooked clauses, and financial statements contradicted prior assurances. Every page was annotated, cross-referenced, undeniable. Eyes widened. Murmurs spread across the boardroom like wildfire. He tried to respond, to reassure, to deflect, but the evidence was irrefutable. The floor beneath his feet was no longer solid. I observed him closely. pride, shock, panic. Each emotion flickered across his face in quick succession. The man who once claimed untouchable status now searched desperately for allies, for explanations, for a lifeline. He reached for my eyes, as if pleading, but I didn't flinch. The woman who had been silent, who had smiled politely, who had been his unseen presence, now stood as a testament to the balance of truth. By the end of the meeting, decisions were being made without his input. Banks froze transfers. Partners renegotiated terms. Regulatory bodies requested immediate clarifications. Every move he had planned was being recalculated, dismantled, restructured. And I, who had been invisible, watched the empire fold, not with malice, but with precision. After the meeting, the atmosphere in the apartment changed. He no longer spoke with the same authority. Even simple sentences seemed rehearsed. Silence stretched across rooms that once resonated with laughter and light conversation. I walked through the halls, feeling the power shift like an invisible tide. Each door I passed, each room I entered, carried remnants of his former control, now diminished. His empire, vast and glittering, had lost its foundation overnight. And I knew, I had orchestrated it with care. Calls from former allies turned into cautious inquiries. Emails were delayed or unanswered. Meetings I had never attended now required my signature. I watched as confidence drained from his gestures. The man who once towered over boardrooms and gala halls now relied on my acknowledgement, my permission, to maintain even the illusion of stability. I spent evenings reviewing the consequences, ensuring that every action I had taken was clean, legitimate, impossible to contest. The precision of my strategy lay not only in dismantling him but in maintaining my integrity in the eyes of everyone else. I had become untouchable not through brute force, but through calculated patience. He approached me one night, attempting to negotiate, to plead, to convince. I listened calmly, nodding occasionally, letting him spill frustration and fear. By the time he finished, it was clear, the game had ended. He was defeated, not publicly humiliated but privately disempowered. And I, who had once been invisible, now moved freely in the space he had dominated. I sat in the study late at night, reflecting on the events. The city lights twinkled like distant stars, indifferent to human schemes and dramas. I thought about trust, power, and the fine line between loyalty and exploitation. How easily a lifetime of devotion could be manipulated, how quietly an invisible hand could change everything. Memories of our shared years flashed through my mind. Moments of laughter, whispered secrets, and celebrations, all tinged now with the knowledge of what had been hidden. I realized that strength is often silent. Courage is often invisible, and wisdom lies in patience, in observation, in knowing when to act and when to wait. I made a promise to myself that night, never again would I surrender agency. Never again would I let someone else define my worth, my influence, my control. Power could be subtle, quiet, and decisive, and it was mine to wield. By morning, the transformation was complete. The man who once thought himself untouchable now approached with caution. He asked permission rather than issuing demands. He consulted rather than dictated. I responded with calm assurance, guiding without appearing forceful, influencing without exposing intention. In the silence of my apartment, I felt a deep satisfaction. Not revenge for the sake of revenge, but the restoration of balance, the reclaiming of self, the quiet triumph of precision over chaos. Weeks passed, and the world around us adjusted to the new reality. He learned to measure his words, his gestures, his decisions. Meetings that once carried the weight of his dominance now flowed under my influence, subtle but undeniable. I observed patterns, refined strategies, and created small, controlled shifts in the market that enhanced stability without drawing attention. Each calculated action reaffirmed my position, solidifying authority I had claimed not through inheritance, but through intellect, patience, and precision. Friends and colleagues noticed the change, some cautiously admiring, others quietly wary. It was a transformation that required no announcement. Power need not shout, it whispers and waits, and only those attuned can feel its current. At home, our interactions evolved. Conversations carried respect and caution. Decisions were discussed, consulted, and occasionally deferred. I had not sought vengeance for its spectacle. My aim had always been balance, clarity, and the reclamation of agency. Each night, I reflected on the journey, from the silent dinners to the quiet victories, from the invisible maneuvers to the public acknowledgement. A woman once underestimated now guided the narrative of her own life, demonstrating that true power is patient, calculated, and self-assured. As I closed the study window and gazed at the city below, I realized that the most profound victories are invisible to those who do not watch closely. The empire was no longer his alone, it was ours, but in a way only I understood. Months later, the final pieces of the puzzle fell into place. Contracts were renegotiated, debts settled, and the perception of the company restored. No public scandal, no visible battles, only the quiet assertion of calculated influence. Every step I had taken bore fruit. He approached me one evening, in a way that suggested humility rather than dominance. "I underestimated your capacity," he said softly, not as a threat, not as a confession, but as recognition. I nodded, acknowledging the words without a word of triumph. My satisfaction lay in the subtlety, in the knowledge that the balance had shifted permanently. I walked through the office, observing employees who respected, but did not fear me. Influence was evident, authority accepted. Yet, there was no arrogance in my movement, no display of victory. Power had matured into quiet elegance. The city outside continued its rhythm, indifferent to human drama, yet I knew that within these walls, a transformation had occurred. A woman, once relegated to the background, had reshaped the narrative. Agency restored, dignity reclaimed, and control quietly asserted. As I finally poured a glass of wine and reflected on the journey, I realized that true mastery is not measured by spectacle or applause. It is measured by the quiet certainty of one's own influence, the invisible hand guiding outcomes, the patience to wait for the perfect moment. And in that silence, I understood, I had won, not with noise, but with precision, not with chaos, but with calculated patience, and never again would I surrender the power that had always been mine.